Hi, if you're into photography like me, you may be wondering when the time's going to come that you can leave your big DSLR at home and comfortably carry around a small pocketable camera that has the same high quality sensor, good quality lenses to produce high resolution images. Well, Huawei, I think they've made something that does just that. And I'm going to talk to you about whether that's true or not. So one of the big problems in photography is carrying all the gear. Now, I've got 2 DSLR bodies with 5, 6 lenses every time I go to do a photography project. And that's not including lights and stands and tripods and everything like that. Now, part of my interest in photography is being able to take high quality photos wherever I am, and that might just be to take a picture of something incidental that I've seen in the street, or a nice landscape, or a picture of my children. Now, with recent developments in mobile phone photography, there have been some improvements that haven't quite matched up to DSLRs, but with Huawei's new P30 Pro, I think the game has changed significantly. That makes people question whether they need to take their DSLR with them anymore. So by the end of this video, I'll have covered all the options to make you realise whether you need to take your DSLR or you can leave it back in the bag at home. My name's Phil Whippy, I'm a developer at SwiftCase. So why is the new phone released by Huawei so special? So we've had pretty good mobile phone cameras for a while now. And with the release of the iPhone 6S, I think it was, the 6S Max, you were able to have 2 cameras, one which was reasonably wide angle, 28mm, and then another which was kind of a portrait lens, which was 50mm. But the key introduction or piece of technology that really set this camera apart was the ability to have something called a bokeh effect, or a bokeh effect. Now this allowed you to introduce a sort of dreamy, out of focus background into your images, which prior to this was only the preserve of DSLRs or the high-end cameras, and was usually the way that people set their photography apart from mobile phone photography, was using this wide aperture bokeh effect. And it's something that I noticed when I started photography. It was the thing that really drew me in, because it really allowed you to focus on the subject at the expense of everything else, which with 28mm lenses that were on mobile phones meant that everything is in focus. So it's hard to distinguish your subject from the background unless you were skilled enough to use compositional techniques that would do it, i.e. using light and shade, or the colour wheel effectively, so that these subjects will pop from the image. Now with wide aperture and bokeh, you can do that straight away without any real skill. Now, this is a key part of why people are interested in the bokeh effect. And the Huawei P30 Pro does have this, but it also has some other additional features which I think set it apart and put it on the next level of camera phones, which is another nail in the coffin for the DSLR. So what is it that DSLRs offer that make them the go-to piece of equipment for professionals? Well, let's see. They offer depth of field, which is where you get that bokeh effect from. They offer variety. You can have hundreds of different kinds of lenses, from fisheye to telephoto, up to 600mm, so you can take photos of the moon. You can have every range in between, with different kind of levels of aperture size, so that you can get very, very, very out of focus shots and have a very, very thin depth of field. You can use them in the dark. They effectively have night vision at this point, where we have ISOs of 400,000, which effectively allows you to, in combination with using a wide aperture lens, get high shutter speeds in very, very dark environments. They're also highly durable and reliable, so they can use them in extreme conditions like the Antarctic or the desert, and they shouldn't fail. However, not all of them are waterproof, but we'll get onto that in a minute. Another thing is that the images themselves, the output of the camera is in a format called RAW, and this is all the information that the sensor can see when it's exposed to the light. The difference is that with this RAW image, you can manipulate and alter the exposure and color balance in a really powerful and varied way, so that you can make sure that if there's any mixed light in the environment, you can balance for it much easier. If you underexpose by quite a few stops or overexpose by quite a few stops, you can increase the exposure or decrease it, and it doesn't actually have a negative effect on the image. If you use a lossy format like JPEG, which is what most camera phones use, you'll find that if you adjust the exposure or the color too much, it can get very noisy. Now, with RAW, that doesn't happen, and with some, it's incredible, especially with Nikon. Now, finally, you can use a lot of external peripherals, such as microphones, flashes, multiple tripods, and any sort of image stabilization equipment, which also helps you in a professional setting get the best kind of image you can get. However, what generally makes a phone more useful than a DSLR? Well, in this case, it's the best camera is usually the one that you have with you. Now, if you happen to see a shot whilst you're out walking the dog or anything like that, you don't have your DSLR, the best camera you have there is your phone. So the convenience and the size and the pocketability of phones is the advantage. And this was usually at a cost of image quality. Now, in the past, image quality would be, when you mention it, most people would be concerned with resolution, so how many megapixels the camera has. And very, very quickly phones caught up to DSLRs in this manner, but there is more to image quality than just resolution. Another thing I found was that using a phone is way, way more discreet than using a DSLR. So if you want to include people in the pictures as you're out and about, then they're far, far more ready to ignore or not even see you at all if you're using a phone. Whereas if you're using quite a bulky DSLR with a long lens, people can be suspicious and maybe even take offense if you appear to be taking a picture of them. So this is another advantage. Also, I found that the number of photographs you can take within a second has caught up with phones, because they're not limited by a physical mirror, which has to open and close every time a shot is taken. And something like 10 frames per second used to be only available on very, very high-end sports-related DSLRs, but that's easily available now on phone cameras. Also, in terms of raw image files, you can now get them on both Android and iPhone. So that power of editability, if that is even such a word, is now available also on phones. So a lot of the advantages that DSLRs have enjoyed for the last few years are slowly being eroded by the improvements in mobile phones. So how has the Huawei P30 changed the game? Well, it's now got more lens variety. Previously, the best phones had one or two lenses, so you could have a wide angle lens and a reasonable telephoto portrait lens. Now, with the special prismatic lens feature on the Huawei P30, you can actually zoom in extremely far, like 5-10 times optical zoom. This then allows you to really see detail or a subject much further away than has ever been possible with a phone, and is comparable to high-end point and shoots